and there's so many easements and electric lines. It's like trying to fit a square peg in a round hole, you know?
Oh God, dude.
Pain in the ass.
I know. This week was like just packed with so much stuff. It's just too much stuff. We have to like do dinner and just catch up, dude.
Yeah, we do. I'm sorry.
Don't
You're
you
talking.
think?
You're talking.
Yes.
You're talking.
We do one
Right.
maybe next Friday or something. We could all meet
There we
like
are.
before the show or
Yes,
something and do a
yeah.
dinner.
All right.
Although you go on at 5:30.
But I don't have a set time.
Okay.
I just need to record. So
Okay.
I could do it earlier.
Okay.
All right, guys. Your patience is amazing. Thank you very, very much.
Okay.
I'm going to start encoding here. And Barbara, Matthew, can you still hear us? Okay.
Yes.
All right. You sound
Oh,
amazing.
Go.
Yes.
Yay.
Yeah, Barbara's like got a professional mic or something.
I
It's like
know.
clear as day.
Yeah.
All right.
No, this is iPhone.
All right, guys. Here we,
Ah,
all right, here we
it's
go.
Because we're in the studio. Okay.
Here we are.
Welcome to Psyched by MG. This is Mary Grace Randazzo-Ratliff, or MG for short. I've been a psychotherapist in private practice for 32 years now. Guess what, everyone? We all have issues. So it's time to lighten up and move forward. Let's stop letting our crap control us and take control of our crap. Good evening, everyone.
What is up, people?
Oh my goodness. And thanks for everybody who is watching us live on Facebook. We had some tech difficulty tonight, so we're running
Yeah,
a
I'm
little,
sorry, I'm
yeah,
sorry.
a little late. And we want to, thank everybody for listening in. And I have to give a special shout out to Ashley, who wrote a wonderful review on Apple Podcast.
Awesome.
And so she said she listens in regularly. And
Fantastic.
so I wanted to give her a special shout out and ask her to message us if she has any ideas about something that she would like us to talk about, since she's a regular listener.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ashley.
Yes. And then I need all the listeners and viewers right now to stop what they're doing for a minute and get on Spotify, Google Podcast, Apple Podcast, Podcast Detroit, YouTube, and hit like or send us a comment, subscribe. Please, 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 please.
Mhm. We would really appreciate it.
Yeah, we need your support, and we appreciate you 1,000 times. And then, of course, if you do want to message us on Facebook or comment, please do, because we do care about covering, David and I, and Matthew, really, we want to cover what you want to hear. So we welcome you to do that.
Within reason, of course.
Yes, please. Please keep it decent.
Or maybe not. Maybe that's what they want to hear about.
And of course, we have David Wright with us tonight.
Hello, everybody.
Fox, myself, MG, and we have a special guest. Oh, and we have Matthew Burrito with us tonight, of course. He's in this week, which we love having you, Matthew.
Hello, everyone.
And then Barbara Mangami, our special guest, who
Hi,
is,
everyone.
hi, honey, who is a scholar practitioner in public health, epidemiology, with a specialization in minority women's sexual health. She is an anti-violence against women activist who is engaged with several social injustice movements globally. One of the coordinators of Global 1 Billion Rising campaign to end violence against women. She's a writer, an author, woman extraordinaire. Barbara is with us for this part 2 tonight on getting real about racism. We are going to definitely talk about that tonight. Right, Barbara?
Yes, ma'am.
Well, and Barbara's back with us because she was actually with us last week as
Yes.
well. So we're glad to have you back again.
And
Thank
and
you.
we have to wish her a happy birthday, because this
Oh,
blessed soul.
What a great day for a birthday.
She
Thank
came
you. Thank you so
Happy
much.
birthday.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
willing to do the show with us on her birthday and this very special day, which she and I talked on the phone. Today is Juneteenth.
Juneteenth Day.
So we want to wish everybody a happy Juneteenth, and to definitely say, we think it's extremely important. And Barbara, I think we should kind of go to Juneteenth first and talk about the history, because unfortunately, and this saddens my heart to say this, and the white community needs to know what it is. Like it should be something that's a national holiday. It should be something that is recognized, and definitely made significant and important. But I do think we have to explain what Juneteenth is.
Sure. And first and foremost, I just want to say thank you so much for having me on again. I think for me, this is such a great honor to be able to come and do this work with you. I've just come off another platform and we are doing the heavy work. We are doing the heavy lifting, and I'm so grateful for our allies. I'm really grateful for our listeners who are open and ready to do this work so that we can move ourselves forward as a society, as a world. Yeah. And so basically, look, Juneteenth was what, 1865, June 19th. Mm-hmm. The last group of slaves in like a slave bastion in Galveston, Texas, were finally freed. Yeah. So they weren't let go. It was sort of after the end of the Civil War. So when was the American Civil War, right? 1861? I mean,
it was, unfortunately, what's so hard to swallow on that, although the Emancipation Proclamation had formally freed them, it was 2.5 years earlier.
Right.
And yet Texas and it was so slow. I mean, this really should have been celebrated.
Right. And so there was a reason, and several texts say different things. One of the reasons were like, they just didn't have enough troops to get to Galveston to free the slaves in time. The other thing is that the slaves that were in that place didn't know of the Emancipation Proclamation. These weren't the days of internet and text message and Facebook and you know what I mean? So They didn't even know that they had been freed until General Lee appeared with his troops and told them, you're free. And the reason it has become a jubilee and a celebration is because the sheer joy of these freed slaves when they heard that they were now free was immense. I've read several texts that describe this joy as something so palpable in the air. And that is why, rather than talk about the Emancipation Proclamation being when slaves were freed, it's this Juneteenth that has become sort of crystallized in the nation's mind, at least Black America's mind, because of the celebration that finally, it's that whole idea that until all of us are free, none of us are free. Okay. And so this idea that this was the last, meaning that now everybody was free, was cause for this huge celebration. And that's how it's been sort of commemorated in time. Now, just to contextualize everything, so the Civil War, 1861 to 1865, right? The major cause of the disunion was slavery. The states in the South wanted this cheap labor, or very cheap labor. And those in the North, conscience was kind of kicking in perhaps, and they were like, this isn't right, what we're doing is not right. And the Emancipation Proclamation, like you rightfully said, Mary Grace, came 2.5 years earlier than Juneteenth, right? So basically, that proclamation was that all persons held as slaves within the rebellious states, this is in the context of the Civil War, are and henceforth shall be free. Now, granted, there were issues with that statement, which is why then, because again, that's like a total statement complete. Then came the 13th Amendment. And the 13th Amendment was what people kind of solidified around. And the 13th Amendment to the Emancipation Proclamation reads, neither slavery or involuntary servitude except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist in the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. Now, Mary Grace, here's the big debate that goes on. That exception clause forms the basis of what seems to have been the transformation of slavery from what we knew it to be, people picking cotton in the fields, to what it is manifesting as history has marched on. Because let me tell you why. If you remember, slave patrol, right, during slave days,
Yes.
became the police.
Yes.
Their emblem is exactly the same. It's that star.
Mm-hmm.
Think about it.
Yes.
That exception clause that talks about you being a slave, you being a free man until you were convicted of a crime. Well, guess what started happening? Black people started being imprisoned for things like loitering. What does that even mean? You're loitering.
Mhm.
Looking at a white man or white woman wrong, you could be thrown in prison for that.
Mhm.
They were set up for petty crimes. They go into a place that was supposed to be whites only. All that needed to happen, which we're seeing happening again, is for a white person to call the police, who were, remember, slave patrol, to come and pick them up, and they were in prison. So what happened there is they grew a huge prison population of Black men who were what now? Cheap labor. So that exception clause is the thorn in the flesh of Black America in terms of how racism has continued to transform itself because of that clause. So now you've got the police who were once slave patrol, and then you've got the development of the school to prison pipeline. Do you see how this all works? So I'm just trying to paint a broader picture of, as you asked, what is the basis of this racism? And me, and there are many scholars who talk about this, my own thinking is that exception clause in the 13th Amendment.
Oh my gosh, Barbara. I'm sitting here and I'm just thinking as a mom of children, and I'm thinking about how absolutely traumatic it is when you entrap somebody and you beat somebody and you traumatize somebody, and then you do it for generations. And this population of people, they have been so hurt and so traumatized and so disrespected. Just from a therapist perspective, when we look at trauma and when we work with trauma, the first thing that has to be acknowledged is that it happened, and Dave, and you can join in here. We have to hear the story, the history, the pain, the anguish of that trauma.
We listen. We listen and let them tell us.
Let them tell us. That's right. And Matthew, too. I mean, we stay quiet. We try to create that sacred space for healing of that. And we need to shut up and listen and then be able to, I know for me personally, I try to put myself in their shoes and say, oh my God, what but for this is bigger than a war. Like this is such blatant disrespect and disregard and devaluing of such a huge part, a huge population in the United States, and that they are still fighting to be heard and validated is heartbreaking. It's absolutely heartbreaking. And so when I hear this, my first, to be honest, when I was looking at this, I was humbled and kind of saddened that I didn't know about this day.
You know what? It's funny you say that, because this has just come into my consciousness in the last 10
Why?
years,
Why is
if not even that. And that's a just that is a tragedy that we wouldn't know this.
I'm
I'm actually shocked, if I may just interject, because I've known of Juneteenth and I knew what it meant. But, you know, it takes current events sometimes to jolt us into a certain space. I would never have thought that there would be anything going on June the 19th that could supersede me reflecting on my birthday, my own personal life journey. I'm here today because, and I've been working all day, trust, because my birthday does not mean a thing if I don't do this work that we're supposed to be doing.
Right.
And so today for me was another work day. My kids are like, Mom, I'm like, honey, I'm going to finish this last podcast and I'm coming out and we're going to have dinner and cut cake. But you know, I keep thinking of the French, let them eat cake. You know that saying? Let them eat cake when people are starving. That is literally what comes to mind when I think that I would neglect something so critical to the very existence of ourselves as humanity to go and eat cake. And the reason I want to bring this up, guys, and I know that I'm in a safe space and therefore I can be very vulnerable with you guys. Do I have your permission? Do I also have your permission do I have your permission to share something that keeps occurring to me?
Absolutely.
It is when a system, an entire system and institutions are built against the other. When an entire system and institutions are built on blood, rape, pain, horror, subjugation, stealing, plundering.
Yes.
When an entire system and institutions are built around that, there is no single amendment that can fix that. The only reason this amendment became acceptable to the founding fathers, who were slave owners, who were plunderers, who were rapists, who were blah, blah. The only way that would become acceptable to them is if there was an exception in there that would allow them to continue slavery, quote unquote. So on paper, slavery ended. But in real terms, it didn't. It just changed form. And we see this as we move on in history. We talked about this last week. How many times have we had riots, race riots in this country, sometimes for months on end, and yet we still keep finding ourselves back at the same spot? Do you know why? Because any amendments, any new bills that are coming to support a constitution that is inherently written against and to subjugate a group of people, it's not going to work. Now, hear me well. I'm sharing the things that occur to me at the gut level. I'm not saying everybody should agree with me. But when I look at Africa, let's juxtapose. When Africa became free of colonization, every single country that freed itself burnt the old constitution, and all stakeholders came together, including the so-called oppressors, came together for the writing of a constitution that ensured that every single stakeholder's rights in that country were preserved. Okay, so somebody said, you know what, you're a crazy African woman. This was when I said this, and I said, I propose. And my thinking is that this holding on to this founding fathers document, do you notice who wants to hold on to this document as sacrosanct? Let's look at the people who foam at the mouth if you so much as talk about constitutional rewriting. But the constitutional rewriting to include all stakeholders, from my experience on the African continent, is the only way to ensure that everybody's rights are duly protected. Amendments are not working because it's like the very scaffolding is faulty. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I agree. I like your 2 cents. I think they are,
well,
you know,
this is the whole definition again. And again, I know the term's used a lot, systemic. but it is, it's wrong from the foundation up. The only way to correct something like this is to start over.
Mhm.
You can't just keep adding repairs. It doesn't work.
Well,
That Band-Aid.
start over and you own the mistakes. You own the problem. You connect with the pain and the trauma that that problem created. It's got to start with ownership.
Well, and I think it's also important too to be vulnerable, like Barbara, you were saying, and I think that was just so eloquent, and I think it was so beautiful that you actually asked permission, which I find that to be like a reverence that has gone astray. Because I often ask people, even when I'm doing the work that I do to serve people, is permission to be direct, permission to be vulnerable. And part of that is, it's no different than when someone says, am I making you angry? And I say, no, 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 no. You don't have that power over me.
Right.
And so it's the same thing, I think, in, Mary Grace and David, it's like when we're in our therapy sessions, and as you were saying, Mary Grace, about, creating this kind of sanctuary of, for people to come to, that can be amassed, and we can have sanctuaries in kind of different pockets and different areas, and to breathe vulnerability into and have some intentionality and some deliberateness with how we are going to not just say we're going to do something. And I think also it touches on that passivity, like of when people say, I'm so sorry that this is happening, but then don't do anything beyond that. And it's like, okay, so, and it's oftentimes I ask clients, when I've worked in the prison and jails and and I say, what are you going to do when you leave? What municipality, what student, what council, what meeting are you going to go to give yourself and be of service so that you can be part of that solution, and being vulnerable and creating and kind of cocooning us back into a place of intimacy, really. I mean, when we lack intimacy, we start to, it's almost our own internal anarchy starts to go away, and we don't connect. And Mary Grace, we talk about that a lot, is social bonds and social connecting. And what happens is so many people are isolating, and they've been isolating. As long as I got mine, then I'm not worried about yours. Well, by that very it's almost people are proud of speaking about binaries and differential, data and stats. And it's like, it's almost, that's celebrated. And so it's like, trying to, and to quote and paraphrasing, Whoopi Goldberg was talking about racism and a lot of the climate recently. And she said, if it exists, it's going to be like torn, the walls of the building will be torn down, and that racism will no longer exist. And I thought that was really kind of profound, because that is what needs to happen. It has to be torn down. And Barbara, as you were saying, until it is equal for everyone, like zero tolerance.
And we as white society have to understand that we have to work at earning trust back. It's not just going to be given. We have to show that we are willing to change and be different. We have to show that we are going to commit and make this a priority, that we see the wrongness, that we see the trauma, and that it's wrong, and that this has been a problem for years, generations upon generations. This is wrong. That is so important, that we as a white society own that and be committed to the change, not just talk about it. We all, doing therapy, we know the difference between the client that just wants to come in and talk, but doesn't put anything to a different behavior.
The thing about it is Mary Grace, you know, I work with young people. I've told you about young white women that I mentor who are being thrown out of home by their fathers for literally for protesting and saying, I mean, sometimes you hear the video clips, and why you shut up with that Black Lives Matter nonsense.
Mhm.
It is all lives matter. And these kids are literally trying to educate their parents, like, no, Dad, listen to me. All lives don't matter right now. So your statement is false. Because if all lives mattered, why are Black people systematically being tortured and killed? In the last week, we've had 5 young Black people lynched, and they're calling it suicide. Do you know that's crazy making for Black people? To be gaslit like that. First and foremost, I can tell you something. Black men don't go and hang themselves from trees. Like to get a rope and go, especially at a time like this where everything looks so hopeful, to take a rope and then go hang yourself in a tree. What for? That's not how.
And I really, I want white people who are listening, who are brave and committed, to really digest what you just said. That 5 young men were lynched. 5 young men and all their families traumatized. It just to really absorb the trauma here and how serious this is, to really hear it. Because I fear, and I've gotten comments, you know, on the page, which I, you know, deleted, that the ignorance and the lack of compassion and in white society to just stop and slow down and absorb what the stories are, absorb what history has been, take in, allow yourself, quit batting it away and rationalizing bad behavior, racism. Stop batting it away and listen, because I watched this happening. And the rationalizations that I'm reading on social media from people who are blatantly racist and having problems right now. And I just want to scream and say, will you stop your rationalizations? We teach this. Bad behavior is bad behavior, period. You never attempt to understand abuse, bad behavior, devaluing someone, disregards, intellectual domination, whatever it is. You don't ever attempt to understand it, because if you do, you cannot protect yourself from it. Period.
And also, Mary Grace, it's very important to keep in mind, I was teaching a group of young people this, that when colonizers came to Africa, and this happened during slave time, documents are there, in order for white racists to treat Black people the way they do, they have had to dehumanize us. That's why they talk about Black people on the continent. They would write documents like, well, the native is very stupid. He walks around with big grin on his face. The native has a smaller head than us. The native is less human. The native feels less pain than the average white person. So there were so many things that were put in place. I mean, this thing is insidious, that dehumanized us to the point where, let me give you an example that shocked people that I unearthed today. There were 4,000 slaves in this country who were lynched in a picnic setting. What does that mean? White families would go to church on Sunday. After church, they would pick a Black person to torture, mutilate, and burn as entertainment for their families while they ate food. Now, I've been through a war. I know the smell of human flesh. I cannot get it out of my cellular memory. It is hideous. I know the screams of a burning human because I lived through a war as a child. That people can sit and eat food and watch, and then when they were done, take pieces of the charred pieces of that human as souvenirs and take them home. Speaks to me to a total dissociation between head and heart, and a total dehumanization where killing a Black person is literally as good as killing a deer. And even deer probably get more compassion from people.
Mm-hmm.
I want you to understand this, Mary Grace, so that you understand that the jump from acknowledgement, the jump from what you're expecting people to do who are inherently racist, which is to acknowledge. There's a huge chasm before acknowledgement can even come, which is the humanization of other people. We have been dehumanized. There are white people in this country who, when they see the likes of me, really truly believe that I am deficient intellectually, physically, even spiritually bankrupt. They believe this. And it is that belief that enables them to take a Black kid and bang his head on tarmac until his skull is pulp, and then handcuff him when he's already dead and say, oh, well, he posed a threat to me.
Mm-hmm. Now, this is where people have to understand. If somebody can do that, Barbara, you labeled it as they are dissociated. It's not only dissociated. If you can do that, if you devalue a person to the point of harming them, battering them, killing them, we're talking about a level of narcissism to the point of sociopaths and psychopaths. We need to begin to call these people what they are. I want to call them out and say, you need to understand, and I got all the experience, and Dave has the experience, and Matthew has the experience. I can sit here and say, if you're doing those behaviors, this is to the point where narcissism, there is such a complete dissociation from your heart. And I've had many conversations with people in the criminal justice system and authors about that mental disorder and the treatment of it.
And you're right. It is. It's psychotic. It's sociopath. I'm going to say this, but those are as far as the entire group, those are probably a minority that would actually act on this. The problem is there are people who still believe it that won't actually do it, but they still have those same beliefs. And that's the cancer that continues to spread.
And there's the followers. There's the followers. Mm-hmm. That's where I truly think about cults and the type of people that will follow to the point where their dissociation, Barbara, their disconnect from the heart, from compassion. If we were to see somebody getting hurt, it would be brutal. We would feel pain for that person, empathy, compassion, sensitivity, devotion to their care. But people who follow have that dissociative disorder where they are so disconnected from themselves and have such a lack of empathy, but they will follow.
Well, you see real life example of that happening in the last 3 years, 4 years.
4 years. Mm-hmm.
It's exactly what's happening.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But here's the thing, and I'm once again, I'm gonna be vulnerable. I'm gonna share with you my sense and my truth.
Mm-hmm.
And I ranted about this the other day because we were talking about calling racism a mental illness, and I refuse, and I'll tell you why. We have seen the preferential treatment where a Black kid will get brutalized and murdered by the police. And a kid like Dylan Ruth, who went into a church and mowed down a bunch of people who welcomed him in to worship with them, get asked, are you hungry? Yes. Let's stop by a Burger King and get you a burger.
Mm-hmm.
3 weeks ago, there was a kid who shot 2 people. He was covered in the blood of these people. The police came. They didn't spray bullets into him. They got him very gently, got him medical care, And there was an officer literally feeding him water from a water bottle, like, here, baby, drink. Guys, we know we talk about sociopaths. Please, why is the behavior not uniform then? If this is true dissociation, why is this behavior not uniform across the board?
And that is where I think you're right. I still think that it's like with PTSD, post-traumatic stress. And post-traumatic stress, the effects of being raised in a home where a parent has it, the children learn the stress. They develop the stress because of how they are raised. And so it is passed on from generation to generation to generation. And the reason why I want to label it, because again, I am tired of the rationalizations I have been reading about and some of the comments on social media that diminish the seriousness of this situation, the seriousness of the abuse and the trauma.
Let me bring up an interesting question though. Let's go with that if we can diagnose it, but see, in a way, diagnosing it gives it some
It's an excuse.
validity.
It gives it some validity. Exactly.
Yes.
My point.
And can somebody if somebody is hateful and bigoted and racist, they don't have to be mentally ill. They're just a bad person.
They're evil. Pure evil.
I disagree with you, Dave. If they are that disconnected and that dissociated, they have a personality disorder. I mean, there is a seriousness behind that disorder. And when we know what that needs limits, I don't think it's kind of like when I watch, like Dateline or whatever.
Yeah.
And they're like, this person, I don't think they have mental illness, but he did massacre 6. And I say, yeah, but you have to categorize the mental illness. He was of sound mind in regards to he knew what he was doing. He was so disconnected, he didn't care.
Well, let me throw this question then. Wouldn't you, let's base it on that qualification. Everybody is mentally ill to some degree. Wouldn't you agree?
Remember, Dave, it's in the intensity of the symptoms that you get the disorder. Everybody can have traits and behaviors, but we watch the level of the symptom to say, oh boy, they have a problem. We all can get depressed. We all can get anxiety, but it's in the escalation and the elevation of the symptom. And so when I look at something to this degree, this severity of rationalization, of intellectualizing very, very serious bad behavior. And like I said, I give it the reason I'm kind of pushing a diagnosis, it's because of that severity and that it needs to be taken serious. That there is a real disturbance in the way you think if you go to those levels,
right,
and you lack compassion and empathy for somebody.
Now, here's the thing.
There's actually something on the Facebook Live that's out there right now, and it's coming from Bill L. And he actually wants to ask you, Barbara, a question. Outside of the obvious things in the Constitution that are really no longer active, like language that spoke of 3/5 of a person, what are the active parts of the Constitution that you feel really need to be addressed or would be addressed in a new Constitution?
Very good, Bill.
That's a brilliant question. And thank you for asking it, because that's something I'm going to need to really think about. I can't off the top of my head tell you, because I didn't come prepared for a question that deep, but I love it because that's where we want to go. I'm being serious.
Yeah.
I love that question, and I want to go with it. I want us to probe it. I didn't come prepared for that because I had a script that I needed to prepare something. But I shared with you guys from my heart, my sense that...
Can I just go back to Bill just for a second, Barbara?
Sure.
Because I think it starts with people, our representatives, our Congress people, gaining committees, getting those committees to do the needs assessment and looking at it in order to identify what will be the powerful changes that our government needs to make. So I would start with developing the committees to deal with it.
See, to me, that just sounds, I know, and don't
Yes,
take this
Dave?
personally, Mary Grace. That just sounds like rhetoric. We've done that. This
No,
has
we
happened
haven't.
in the past.
No, I am
It's-
talking about a committee that has,
What we need is, and again, this sounds extreme. It sounds drastic. People hold this dear Constitution so close to them as far as it being meaningful.
that's true.
We need to start from scratch. That's what needs to happen.
Yes,
And
I agree.
and I know I'm living in fantasy land, but that's the only way to have a chance.
And I agree. I
at
agree with
fixing
that,
this.
that they have to start from scratch. I'm not saying to
Mhm.
form a committee to just change the verbiage.
Right.
I'm
right.
talking about, we have to do a real assessment here of what is the problem and how is it affecting people,
Mhm.
and how is it continuing from generation to generation to keep the problem going.
And we have to look at it line by line, which is why I like the committee idea. I think that's a brilliant idea. To look at it line by line with all stakeholders. That's the key. It shouldn't be one small group. The so-called founding fathers are long gone, and we've got this document written in the 1800s that the people who come in now continue to, it's almost like a religious text.
Yes.
Which
yes.
also is a problem with religious text, because religious text should be evolving with the people and the culture.
Yep.
These texts are supposed to serve the people, not the people serve the texts, if you know what I'm saying.
Yes.
It's the same thing with culture. Culture needs to evolve because culture is the people. People make the culture doesn't make the people. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes.
So when we
yes.
hold texts and words sacrosanct to that degree, implicit in that is that there's going to be an imprisoning and an injustice, because as people evolve and grow, there's certain things that are going to be outgrown from that culture and from that text. So for example, I'll give you, when I unearthed this story about the picnics, do you know what my first instinct was? Revulsion. And then I sat back and I said to myself, who does that? What kind of human can do that? Because again, I am not of this ilk, not necessarily because of my skin color, but because of the kind of human that I have grown myself into be. That there are certain things that are so sacred, such as human life. It doesn't matter if you're a Martian from the moon, agree. Who does such acts of cruelty and thinks it's okay? And then takes souvenirs of body bits to take home? So for me, when I say, I always say that, revolution and the movement and huge quantum leap shifts in culture and in ways of being and transformation of humanity come from those mavericks who bring forward these crazy sounding ideas. Because what tends to happen is trying to continue to do what is normal because that is what's comfortable is what gets us back to square one in the first place. And so I love the question that was asked, because that's a question that now can lead us into trying to envision. I really believe in the power of manifestation and envisioning. So when I share with you my heart and I tell you what I see, given the enormity of this thing, and the fact that the police was once, that's why people are saying defund the police, scrap it and start again, because this was slave patrol, guys. Mm-hmm. And we're not talking many, many years ago. We're talking in a finite amount of time. Slavery was abolished not that long ago, right? And so if slave patrol just transformed into the police, doesn't that require a revisiting of what policing is and what the police ought to be doing and how the police ought to be trained?
And I also think too, if I may, and this is something that I've had far too much experience in, and also, but doing the work that I do, is that going back to the Constitution, and someone who is a constitutionalist, and it's Dave, as you were saying, kind of like holding it near and dear, part of it is we have to get real quick. And part of that is recognizing that we don't criminalize crime, we criminalize the color of people's skin. And I know that's very difficult for people to hear at times. However, when you have 56 to 62% within the last 5 years, even the stats, the national stats on, you know, African Americans, Hispanics, and other individuals who have been classified as a minority status incarcerated, you're criminalizing the color of their skin, you're criminalizing their heritage, the ideology of and the epistemology of their life and their livelihood and their history. And I think recognizing that, and interestingly enough, if white individuals, non-Caucasian or white, I'm sorry, individuals were incarcerated at the same rate as African Americans, Hispanics, and minorities, we would see our prison population, jail population diminish by, the stats at one point were like 40 to 45%. Wow. And so when you think about that, especially even with substance use and abuse, especially right now in the last 10 years with the opioid epidemic and the, you know, which is really almost a pandemic at this point with that, with the stats with that, if you are looking at, we have to, it's not just decriminalizing, and a lot of people say the war on drugs and decriminalizing that. We have to decriminalize the color of the skin. We have to decriminalize by looking at and being vulnerable is, you know, like as you were saying, Barbara, and looking at that. So when you're looking at the stats, again, it's staggering. White people use drugs 4 to 6 times more than Blacks and African Americans and brown people. And yet they make up 40% less of the prison population. So we're not criminalizing, again, the crime, but we have to rationalize. And as you were saying, Mary Grace, there's that word and that defense mechanism that people love to, kind of put out there as, oh, well, we are tough on drugs and we're tough. No, you're tough on a human, on a race. You're tough on the color of the skin of somebody, and you have to be secure enough to feel the heat in your body as you're talking about it, to be vulnerable. And as you were saying, and as we're sitting here and being vulnerable enough to talk about it and being intimate enough to talk about it and have that realness to understand what is really happening. And even if you're not and this is where, again, metaphors speak to me, they have my whole life being part of the LGBTQI community, is that metaphors have allowed me to live a life when I didn't feel like I had a life. And I often think that's where, when I've spoken to my partners in life who have been, Black, brown, African American, or Hispanics, or anyone classified of a minority, is that when you think about living your life, we have to understand and not criminalize, again, just the notion of that person being human. And that's what is really we're incarcerating people without even incarcerating them. And so I see it firsthand, and it disgusts me, and it's something that I have always tried to kind of invest my time and my power, my love and passion. But at the same time, people don't have to be incarcerated as well to be incarcerated, or to be treated and beaten into submission implicitly, to feel like they won't belong, to feel like they won't actualize to a human being.
That's it.
So when people, the next time, for all the listeners, all right, now follow me because I'm in this. So the next time someone says to you, and they say, I don't feel like a human because I know when I walk in that department store, okay, or when I walk into this store and I'm looked at like I'm a criminal, or I have 3 or 4 people following me because of the color of my skin, you shut the hell up, you hold their hand, and you listen, not just hear, but listen, and you tell them, tell me your story. Tell me your story. I'm going to shut the hell up. I'm going to perfect my silence. I'm going to take the cotton out of my ears and put it in my mouth because I've been talking too much. You hear? So now it's your turn to talk. And that's what's going on. And for the listeners, don't be afraid. You're not going away. You're just experiencing an iota of what Black, Brown, and African Americans have felt the entirety of their evolution. Come
Can
correct
I just
me.
add to that? Woo, you preach. Whoa. Woo. All right.
Thank you so much for giving me the platform.
Ooh, I just got goosebumps. I've got to share something that buttresses exactly what you say. There's a video clip I have. 2 Black guys walk into a store. They pick a basket and they're shopping. An 82-year-old lady says, well, go on then. Aren't you going to rob the store? So the guy takes his phone out and says, can you just repeat what you said to me? He says, well, aren't you going to do it? I was kind of, listen to this. I was kind of hoping you might wait a little so I can just check out and get out of here before you rob the store. So the guy says, this is him and his friend. They're passing through a little town. They're just driving. So the guy says, now, why would you say that I'm here to rob the store? Listen to this. Because that's what you people do. Now I felt such pain in my womb. And I thought, so this is the plight of, because I'm not a Black man. I've got my own stuff, okay, as a Black woman. But to put I literally felt diminished as a Black man. And I thought to myself, until they get to where they're getting on this journey, how much of this must they take every time they stop to use the restroom, every time they stop to get a drink, every time they stop to put gas in their car? How much of this must they take before a human explodes? It is heartbreaking, guys. And that's why I want these vulnerable conversations, because I have to believe that the people who are doing this know no better. And that somewhere in there, by being vulnerable and sharing like this, we can break some hearts open. That's why I put myself here to do this. It's very painful. But I'm gonna keep doing it if indeed this is what it's gonna take for us to move ourselves from this space we're in. Do you know what it feels like for me to mentor white kids? I want to be real. Can I be real? Can I be honest with you guys?
Please.
I am a Black woman, a mother to 4 Black teenagers. The other day, there's a young 19-year-old, the same age as my daughter, who was brutalized and raped and then murdered because she spoke of her sexual assault at a Black Lives Matter rally. There's no way I could not identify as a mother. I looked at my Chi-Chi and I looked at Oluwatosin and I was stunned. And yet in my inbox, I have white teenagers, 19, 20, who are saying, Auntie, help me. My dad's kicked me out of home. What am I gonna do? Can you imagine, put yourself in my shoes for a minute. When I know of the ambivalence and the racism in the parents of these children who are coming to me for help, it is such a horrible space to be in, because I love young people with everything in my soul. That's probably why I do what I do. And that's probably why I'm sitting here, because I really believe they're the hope. But I have moments where I'm like, should I just tell these kids to leave me alone? Like, I've got enough on my plate. I've got my own teenagers to protect from brutality sanctioned by your racist parents, because as long as they are racist, they are part of the problem. Whether they be the ones pointing the gun and shooting at these kids or not doesn't matter. You form part of that collective problem if you are racist. I don't care if you're racist from your couch in your home, or you're the police who pulls out a gun and kills somebody. You're part of that problem. And yet I have your children in my care. You know what it reminded me of? Can I just be real again? I had these images of Black wet nurses nursing white babies. When you see these images and that's how I feel right now. Like I am nursing, I am nurturing white babies of people who don't have a problem hating people who look like me. It was okay to have Black wet nurses. There are pictures of a Black woman with her baby on one breast and a white baby on the other. And the madam is lying in the bed over there because she doesn't want to mess up her body breastfeeding. Guys, do you understand what this does to the soul?
Oh, Barbara. I'm sitting over here and
it just makes people recognizing feeling less than. And I think that's part of is you don't have to understand everything. That's not what I think, even when we're talking tonight, but even just having people going to these rallies, people understand it. But understanding, and for the people, for who are human and who are not disconnected and who are able to have that empathy is, have you ever felt less than? And then listen. And, I remember one time, permission to be open and vulnerable with you guys. I remember one time I was doing group, and this was actually earlier on in my career, and I had started out in correctional and kind of jail. And I remember I'm doing a group, and one of the gentlemen had said, we don't want any faggot therapy from you. And I thought, and of course I've gone through my own therapy. I've gone through, because you have to be a therapist to be a therapist. The becomes a teacher, teacher becomes a therapist, to be a good one. And so I'm sitting there and I'm like, okay, get my ego out of the way. This isn't about me. What are you afraid of? And interestingly enough, that person, we were able to establish some level of understanding because I wasn't giving a reaction. I understood to get my ego out of the way and said, you're afraid of something. And as long as I've been living and knowing and just also being around people who have also experienced racism and my kind of disparities and any depression of social silo, it's like really just understanding that is that when you can kind of get out of your own way, and then you're able to really hear, not just listen. When people are like, yeah, that's just active listening. But when you're able to really hear, and you can just have that compassion and that empathy, and it's more of a process too. I think people are thinking that, sometimes it's just going to be an event. That one day is going to wave the magic wand and it's just going to all magically stop. And that's not going to happen.
Yeah, it's not. And, this keeps running around in my head, and I know we're going to wrap in just a few minutes, but, I can't, of course, I can't possibly be able to imagine what it's like to have a Black son or daughter, and what the fear, the anxiety, the kind of parenting you have to do in order to teach them how to be safe and protect themselves. And I shared, just a couple sessions ago that my son has come out as a bisexual young man. So the only thing, as I sit here and I listen to this, I think about my own experience, my own terror, my own fear, my pain as my son goes into this world that discriminates against gays, lesbians, bisexuals, transgender. And so for me, I am beginning to experience on a much smaller scale, because I don't ever want to minimize what, African families or African American families go through, because it's everywhere. Walking into a store. But I am connecting on the level of, I'm afraid for my son, and I know what I'm going through with that experience. And I know the pain and the anguish, and he's going to go off to college, and he's leaving the nest, and all the millions of thoughts I have in my head. It's brutal. It's brutal.
And you know what, babes? Sorry, I'm calling you babes because that's what I usually call you.
Yes.
You know what? Here's the thing, Mary Grace, between your pain, your sorrow, and the sorrow and pain you have for your son and mine.
Mm-hmm.
Your son, if it gets too hot out there, might decide, you know what? Nobody needs to know. My girls, they cannot rub this melanin out of their skin. So there's no place to hide.
There's no place to hide. And that's why I want to acknowledge that this is your skin. This is, it's connected to everything all the time. And I guess I would like to challenge right here in closing the show. I would like to challenge all of the white people who are listening, who are willing to listen, to go to the dinner table tomorrow and open up this dialogue. And maybe to start with, can you imagine being afraid to walk in a store? Can you please, let's do an exercise where we put ourselves in the other person's shoes to expand empathy and compassion and sensitivity, and to help ourselves to be pushed to be aware of the pain and the anguish that racism causes. So I challenge you all to have those good, hard, difficult conversations with your kids, with your family, with grandparents. I challenge you all to do that. And I really hope you will. Because we all have to start talking about it. And we all have to start walking in another person's shoes. Mm-hmm. Thanks, everyone. I'm so sorry to, I'm not even sure what we're doing next week, but we will.
We will be here. We will be here next week.
And I want to thank Barbara. She's going to be back, so just everybody needs to know that. And like I said in the beginning of the show, you can find us on Facebook, the podcast world, Spotify, Apple Podcast, Google Podcast. And our co-host David Wright has a new show. I want to give that a plug, David.
Motor City Hypnotist Podcast.
Yep.
It should be out. We just recorded our first 2 episodes, so it should be out shortly.
Yes.
But look for us on Podcast Detroit, and then on all where other podcasts are offered.
Yep. And a plug to, of course, Detroit Podcast Network for hosting us and doing such a great job. Yay. I want to thank everybody there.
Podcast Detroit. Woohoo.
And I want to thank everybody for listening in. I cannot tell you how much we appreciate it, and we appreciate you. And we definitely hope you will go to our different locations and hit like.
Also, happy Pride Month again.
And happy Juneteenth, everybody.
Happy Juneteenth.
And blessings to everyone. Thank you.
And happy birthday, Barbara.
Happy birthday, Barbara.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you guys. Love you.
Mwah.
Whoa.